So, imagine your civilization is falling. Everything you know is being destroyed, and everyone you know and love is either dead, fleeing, or missing. And then someone shows up and he tells you he can fix it so that this all never happened. How far would you go?
Hello, my name is Garvin, and I read things and blather on about them on the internet for your entertainment. Today we cover Book 5 in the Perry Rhodan Lemuria miniseries. The book is entitled The Last Days of Lemuria, which means we are rapidly closing in on the end of this 6-book miniseries and our look at the Perry Rhodan universe. But rather than dwell on that, I'm just going to warn you real quick that there are spoilers for the book incoming in the rest of the video. So if you'd rather read the book first, now is the time to hit that pause button or even the stop button and just rejoin us later. With that said, let's turn to. So The Last Days of Lemuria pretty much covers exactly what you think it would from the title. This novel is set in the last days of the Lemurian Beast War, where aliens known as the Beasts were destroying Lemurian civilization and trying to wipe out its people. They would only succeed in wiping out most of those people, though, leaving survivors scattered in hidden colonies or reduced to the Stone Age in the destroyed rubble of a once great civilization, or evacuated to the Andromeda Galaxy. Because, as it turns out, in this novel, a lot of Lemuria's remaining resources and military strength is devoted to using powerful technology to literally teleport millions of people to another galaxy and out of reach of the aliens trying to kill them all. I didn't know this had happened due to my lack of background knowledge in the Perry Rhodan universe, but it's a neat fact, and it makes perfect sense that if you can't beat these guys, get away from them. This story is told mostly through the eyes of Ikto-Tolat, the immortal Halooter and Perry Rhodan's best friend, who in the last book was sent from the modern day of the series over 50,000 years into the past to complete a time loop by his older self. And isn't that some Back to the Future stuff right there? We also get a viewpoint from a number of Lemurian characters, chief among them Levian Perron. In this case, he's a much younger Levian who has just been granted his immortality a couple years ago by a person he doesn't know, but assumes to be a returning ancient hero of Lemuria. Levian takes this gift and assumes it means that he is meant to find a way to defeat the beast, undo the war, and preserve Lemurian civilization through time travel. Which we, the readers, know that while he will succeed in preserving Lemurian civilization in the form of the space arcs, he's gonna fail in his plan to militarily crush the beast. Because if he did, human civilization as we know it wouldn't exist, because the Lemurians are our direct ancestors. Lemur, the homeworld, is Earth. Which means if Lemuria never fell, our society, our civilization would never existed, and we would never be born. So, something to think about there. I should also note that Perry and the rest of the recurring cast from the last 4 books aren't in this one, because they were left in the future. So it's just Ikto-Tolat and Levian Perron that we're dealing with here. But let me get back to Ikto-Tolat here, because he's got a number of problems. You see, he appears at the end of the Lemurian Empire inside a Lemurian secret compound, a top secret compound which was running time travel experiments that almost no one knew about because the leaders of the experiments were killed by the beast before they could send in any reports, and the remaining personnel not only don't have the clearance to contact anybody, but have no damn idea how to work the time machine. That is some perfect catch-22 stuff right there. Ikto does know how to work the time machine because he learned in the future, but he's a Halooter, a direct descendant of the beast, and he looks just like him. So when he shows up, any Lemurian who sees him goes into screaming and shooting hysterics. To be fair, I don't blame the Lemurians for their hysterics, even if I think Ikto-Tolot's a pretty great guy who doesn't really deserve that. Because he looks just like the people who have been relentlessly hunting and slaughtering almost every Lemurian they can find as if they were a type of vermin, and the ones they don't kill, they just endlessly torture. And let's go over what these people look like. Ikto-Tolot is over 10 feet tall. He's almost 6 feet wide. He has 3 red glowing eyes, teeth that would fit on a shark. And he can tear a truck in half with his bare hands. Oh, he's also immune to just about any small arms fire you can use on him. To hurt him, you would have to use medium-sized artillery. I don't mean kill, I mean hurt. He's still gonna walk away from that. And then keep in mind, the Lemurians have been going through this for 97 years. So honestly, screaming hysterics combined with shooting everything they have at him, that's kind of the best you could expect, even if he's sitting there with his hands up saying, wait, I come in peace, you don't need to shoot. No one's gonna buy that. Fortunately, Levian is able to overcome his instincts and hear Tolot out. It helps that Tolot kills several of the beasts when they attack the planet the time machine is on, and does it where Levian can find out about it, so that buys Tolot a bit of credit. Together, they are able to relocate the time machine even as the planet it was built on is being destroyed. However, we do see some foreshadowing of the ruthlessness that would allow Levian to live among the Iconians, making friends and even lovers among them, while planning to wipe them completely from history through time travel, because his first plan was to grab the time machine and leave everyone on the planet to die, and he had to be blackmailed out of it. His viewpoint is, well, was and is, I should say, that he can go back in time and win the war, and then none of these people will die in the first place, so leaving them to die on this planet simply doesn't matter. If you ask me, that's a dangerous view to have. A person who thinks they can go back in the past and simply redo everything is someone who has convinced themselves that no crime, no atrocity, no evil they commit really matters, because if you can travel back to the past and simply undo it, did it ever really happen in the first place? I think that can lead to someone talking themselves into some really monstrous actions if you're not careful. What's kind of interesting, though, is we actually see him come up with a plan that fails in Book 4 after talking to Ikto-Tolot, and Tolot gives him a lot of information on the future and how Tolot himself arrived in Livian's time. So Livian decides he'll ride to the future in the space arcs that he's going to create in the past, because he is going to go back in time to before the Beast War, long before when the Lemurians are first going to space. And then he'll find the space arcs, which are going to be undergoing time dilation, and use the machine that sent Tolot back to win the war. But to do that, he does have to go back and send out the arcs in the first place. Now, Tolot flat out tells him that going back to win the war won't work, because the Beast are the pawns of another group that are called the First Vibratory Power. I'm really assuming that sounds better in German. If there are any German speakers watching this, please let me know if it does. I have no idea who the First Vibratory Power are, other than they're the people who somehow made the Beast and sent them off to wipe out the Lemurians. And they're off in another galaxy. I also know that they're not important in the story because they only show up in a couple of conversations and they don't have any impact. But the long and short of it is, apparently if Levian goes back and arms up the Lemurians, the First Vibratory Power will simply hand more powerful weapons to the Beast in turn and render his efforts meaningless. Now, how much Levian believes this is questionable. It doesn't really seem like he takes it to heart. I have to admit, this plan is more understandable coming from a Livian who has watched so many friends, and probably family, die, and hasn't seen this future that Tola talks about. So to him, it's just a maybe probable future, and he's willing to sacrifice a probability to preserve his loved ones in the here and now, at least from his viewpoint. If you told me to sacrifice all of current Western civilization for the well-being of distant descendants tens of thousands of years in the future, I don't think I'd be able to do it. From my viewpoint, you'd be asking me to let real people die for theoretical people who don't exist yet. And in this book, at least, Levian's in the same position. In book 4, where he's living in that future and has been part of this society for centuries, it's way more villainous, because these are people he knows, these are people he's spent time with, and he's deciding to kill them anyways for people who have been dead for 50,000 years. It's a desperate plan from a desperate man, but this is a story of desperation. Tolat is desperate because he's constantly trying to figure out what he should be doing to avoid destroying his home, time, and space. Levian is constantly working to find a way to save his time and space, and mostly they're able to work together because their goals overlap a lot. They both want to protect and save as many people as they can. Tolat wants to preserve as much life as he can without destroying history, and Levian will take all the help he can get, and he needs it, because this book does a great job of showing just how outmatched the Lemurians and their military is. We have a fleet engagement where Lemurian heavy cruisers engage beast-like cruisers, outnumbering them almost 5-1, and there were no survivors on either side as far as I could figure out. The Lemurians can only achieve local victories by outnumbering and outgunning the beast fleets by absurd margins, and all that does is buy a delay, as sooner or later a larger, heavier beast force will show up and wipe out anyone they can. This book does answer several questions. The question of how Levian got to the past to start the Space Ark project, and how he knew the beasts were coming in the first place, because he lived through the war and traveled back in time to make sure something of Lemurian culture and traditions would survive it. It also answers the question of how Tolat ended up in 2 places at once, because he was on a Lemurian Space Ark and he crashed on that planet back in book 2, despite being also across the galaxy. I'm still working on who just gave Levian immortality in the first place and gave him the plans to make a bunch of other cell activators to make more immortals. Tolat does offer a theory that it was a super being named IT, or IT, I'm not sure how to say it, which, according to him, is some kind of super intelligence that runs the galactic supercluster. I'm not entirely sure what that is. It almost sounds like he's describing a deity, only he's trying to do it in science fiction terms. It is mentioned that this being, IT or IT or however it's said, is also the being that made Perry immortal in the first place, which is interesting. If there's a Perry Rhodan fan willing to share more information in the comments, please feel free, because I'm avoiding looking things up just to see if I can grasp this series on its own terms, and also to avoid spoilers. Well, while I've gone over that question a lot, just about every other question that was raised earlier in the series is kind of answered in this book. And in the 4th book, we did end with having the beast emerging in the future or the modern day of the setting, whichever tense you would prefer. So I am looking forward to book 6 and finishing the series. As for book 5, it was rather well done, and this was the book that required the most outside knowledge so far. But that's not really pertinent to the plot. The things I would need to know are, like, who are the first vibratory power and why do they matter? Tolat mentions that he and other characters went back in time even further to the dim reaches of Lemuria's past and had some sort of effect on Lemurian society there. That sounds like an interesting story, but I didn't need to know what happened in that story to understand this one. I was able to follow along with the plot, understand all the characters and their motivations. Although, it does help that most of the characters have really straightforward, easy to understand motivations, like, I don't want to die. I don't want my people to be genocided. And to be fair, those are motivations I think everyone should be able to sympathize with. Not wanting to die and not wanting your people wiped out is something I think we can all understand. And I shouldn't have to say this, but the internet has constantly left me disappointed, so I'm just going to remind everyone, remember folks, genocide is bad, no matter who you're doing it to. I know that seems very simplistic, but I keep running into people who can't grasp that. Well, on that note, I think this is a good place for me to climb down off of the soapbox and end this week's video. I do apologize for the preachy note there, and I thank you for your indulgence. That said, I hope you found this video informative, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, or consider subscribing. All of these help me in my eternal struggle against the dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you'd like a voice on the subject of future videos, consider joining my Everwise patrons for $1 a month. There's a link in the description below. Speaking of patrons, special thanks to Big Steve. I hope this story is giving you some ideas, man, because there's a lot of stuff flying around in this series. Next week, we wrap up this miniseries and bid a fond farewell to Perry Rhodan's universe. I hope you'll join me for that, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading!